When I was a little kid, the two things I loved most in life were Godzilla and NES games. So naturally, when Godzilla Monster of Monsters came out, it was like a dream come true. Well, almost. To sum it up, most of the games revolved around getting through very repetitive outer space levels while smashing up tanks and jets, and then fighting against Godzilla's monster enemies. Overall, it was pretty mediocre, but back then I didn't care. When I got the game as a present for my 10th birthday, I played it night and day as much as I could. Unfortunately, I had traded the game for Amagon a year later, much to my regret when I found out what the game was like. Recently, I had bought a new NES system, and through a lot of hunting and asking around, my friend Billy finally managed to find a copy of Godzilla Monster of Monsters. I was pumped to play my favorite childhood game. It never even occurred to me to ask where Billy found it. He also gave me other games like Legend of Zelda, Bomberman, and some stupid thing called Action 52. But Godzilla had to come first. So I started the game, and the nostalgia just came flooding back like a tidal wave. Godzilla's 8-bit theme song flooded proudly through the speakers, and I was soon grinning like an idiot. Some people laugh at me for playing such outdated games, but I've never had much enjoyment for any other games other than those on the NES. Those 8-bit games take me back to when things were much simpler, more safe. But after what's happened with this game, I don't have those feelings anymore. I'd forgotten how quick the smashing things as Godzilla wore off in the scrolling levels. The game bombards you with bullets and things crashing into you from every direction, and you're too big to avoid most of them. Although my excitement had worn down some, it wasn't long at all before I got to my first boss battle. My first opponent was Ghidorah, an obscure squid kaiju who had never been in a Godzilla movie. The most annoying things about fighting Ghidorah is that he always backs you into a corner and starts smacking you with his tentacle, and you're unable to move until he gets off you. This move doesn't do any damage, but it can stall you until the timer runs out and you have to start the fight over, and he regains some health. It's annoying as it sounds, and of course he did it when I fought him. Only for some reason this caused the game to glitch up because once he started smacking me, he never stopped. The timer is supposed to end the fight in about 40 seconds, but this lasted nearly for 5 minutes. After a while, the graphics started to mess up with little red blocks all over the place. Which was weird, but I just took the game out, blew on it, then started again. I wasn't about to let a little glitch stand in my way. So I started again this time and defeated Ghidorah and the level's other boss monster, Mogera, without any problems. So then it was on to the next planet, Mars. I browsed around the board and found something unexpected. Where Varant's piece should have been, there was instead a piece representing Titanosaurus. There were only 10 kaiju in the game, and Titanosaurus was not one of them, or so I thought. Perhaps Titanosaurus was originally intended to be in the game but was swapped out with Varan for some reason? So I began to feel very excited. Not only was I playing my favorite game, but I was playing a prototype of some sort with a new monster. Needless to say, I ran through the levels as fast as I could to see Titanosaurus in action. I fought Ghidorah again and beat him before he could do his tentacle smack, but this time the glitch started happening when he died. Ghidorah's sprite didn't sink to the bottom, but instead seemed to be devoured by the glitch, and his eyes started randomly spawning all over the screen. I know now that these glitches with Ghidorah were my first warning sign that something was very wrong with the game, but I foolishly ignored it, and proceeded on to fight Mogera, who this time had a glitch of his own. Mogera was twice his size he should have been, which startled me. He was also considerably harder to beat than usual, which is to say not at all. But soon I had defeated him also, and when he died yet another glitch happened. This happened extremely fast, so I was lucky to get a screen cap of it all. But what happened was that the giant Mogera sprite started to shatter and melt. Also, if you look at the garbled text at the right corner of the screen, you'll notice what appears to be a bird in a cage. I still have no idea what that meant. At this point, I was about to fight Titanosaurus, and I was worried as to what kind of glitches would happen this time. But to my surprise, Titanosaurus looked just fine. Although all of the game's bipedal monsters were the same height, Titanosaurus was a bit taller. But since Titanosaurus was actually taller than Godzilla in his film debut, I thought this was kinda cool. After a very fun fight with a monster that wasn't supposed to be in the game, I took over the enemy base and proceeded to not to Jupiter like normal, but instead Pathos. Pathos was the same as Jupiter in layout, except the board was dark blue rather than green. The first thing I noticed was that all the usual level icons had been replaced by a blue rock and some kind of orange honeycomb shape. There was one icon that had part of the jungle icon shape, but I didn't pay much thought to it. I checked the other side of the board to see the new monster. Instead of Hedorah, it was Biolante. But that couldn't have been right. Godzilla vs. Biolante didn't come out until 1989. This game was made in 1988. Perhaps Toho put Biolante in the game to build excitement for the movie next year, but changed their minds? I tried to rationalize the game's abnormality any way I could, but this would prove to be futile. Pathless Map song was the first new song I heard in the game. Like most of the new songs, it was hard to describe. I'll try. It started out slow and suspenseful, much slower than any song in the game, but every 12 seconds or so there would be a loud clashing sound in the tempo change. It was like the composer randomly played parts from 5 different songs with the same instruments. I moved Godzilla over to one of the many blue rock icons that had replaced the jungle icons and started the level. The level resembled a blue mountain range with a blood-red planet in the sky. There was something odd about the mountains. They had a shredded paper look to them. I thought at first maybe the glitch had affected it, but it looked far too intentional. I quickly noticed something else about this new level. There were no enemies. At all. Not even obstacles. I should also mention that this was where the point meter started to become glitch beyond comprehension. It didn't bother me much, I never kept up with game points. So without having to focus on anything, I listened to the music while walking through the level unopposed. The music had a sorrowful feel to it. It would have been rather pleasant had I heard it in a normal game. The level went on for 3 scenes, but with no obstacles around, I finished it very quickly. I tried other levels of the same type to see if any enemies appeared, but there were none. There was little else to be seen in the Blue Mountains, so I tried the other level type. I started one of the orange levels and my eyes were assaulted with a grotesque background of tumorous orange eyes. The sky was the same as the ground, so I assumed the game was indicating that this level takes place in a cave. The only enemies here were a Mantango spawn, but as you can see, the little bastards were everywhere. The music certainly didn't help, with a mixture of screeching sounds and loud drum beats that sounded like the monster's theme in a horror film. After completing it, I tried to avoid playing through any more of the levels whenever I could. The map was short, so it was only a few minutes before I was headed towards a rematch with Jizora and Mogera. But this time, their sprites and attack patterns were vastly different. I fought Mogera first. Mogera's replacement was a flying machine with a slight resemblance to a Pascagoula alien. It was a bit like Falling Mothra, only it moved with a lot more grace. It attacked by spinning its front tentacle like a corkscrew, and it still had an I-beam, except now it fired from the drill. This lanky aberration had replaced Jizora, and the new beast was more of a challenge. It would run and jump at a fast pace, constantly swinging its arms around, making it hard to get close, and of course it tried to pin me in the corner with as much as annoying resolve as ever. I defeated it using a combination of tail whips and heat beam spamming. I defeated them and was going to fight Titansaurus, but when I started the fight, Titansaurus was nowhere to be seen, and the game simply went back to the map with the Titansaurus piece now missing. There was no one left to fight now but Biolante, so I eagerly started the battle. I was quite surprised that Biolante started the fight in her rose form. She was immobile and used tentacles to keep me away from the main body, which took most of the damage. As expected, she turned into a farmer form after taking enough damage. The sprite looked pretty damn good for an 8-bit. The battle technique was the same, except now Biolante can move, albeit slower than any other monster. Being hit by the tentacles did more damage now, and Biolante can do an acid spit, which I managed to avoid by jumping in the screen cap. Not much more different to beat than Titansaurus, and it only took 2 rounds. But when Biolante was gone, the music had stopped, and there was a new icon replacing the base. This icon wasn't there before I beat Biolante. It resembled a red tribal mask, and I had a feeling of dread when I saw it. since it replaced the base, it must be the only way to exit Pathos. I moved Godzilla to the square and started the level. It was a hellish looking place with no sky, a flickering fire in the background. The fire looked far more advanced than anything I've seen on the NES. There was music in the form of a slow, steady drum sound resembling a heartbeat. All the text on top of the screen and the life bar were gone, and their place was a single bit of text in the middle of the screen that said, "Run." My feeling of dread had intensified. I cautiously walked through the level, but like the Blue Mountains, there were no enemies. I paced around for a minute before thinking, run? From what? The first time it hit me, I didn't even see it. I heard a noise outside my room and turned back to see if something fell, and when I looked back, Godzilla was dying. I figured it must have just been a glitch, but I wasn't going to play through the game without Godzilla, so I restarted the game and went to the password screen. Have I ever mentioned how creepy the password screen music is? If you played the game, you know what I mean. It doesn't at all fit the mood of the game. It's more like something from a horror game. Maybe they made it like that so kids wouldn't cheat. I was quite annoyed at this point because I thought I was going to have to fight all the monsters again, but that didn't happen. The game started me off right where I was before I started the red phase level, so I tried again, making sure to pay attention this time. That's when I heard a low bellowing sound, and then I saw it, this thing. Do you know that feeling when your body has when you feel like you're in extreme danger? You start to recoil and tense up as the adrenaline flows through your veins, and your nerves start to feel very cold? That's the feeling I had when I took this screen cap. I haven't seen all the Godzilla movies, but I'm pretty sure this was never in any of them. It had to be something the creators made up. But what kind of sick fuck would put this in a children's game? By sheer dumb luck, or perhaps the adrenaline boost, I managed to run fast enough to get away from it. It ran very fast, so much that if you saw it, you were almost certainly going to die. And when I say die, I mean your monster gets killed instantly if the creature touches them. Once I had gone back to the map, I was so afraid that I was extremely tempted to just shut the game off and try to pretend this never happened. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It couldn't have been real. And even if I wanted to continue, I still had to get Mothra through this chase level. But as I stayed inactive on the map screen for a few minutes, my fear was replaced by burning curiosity. What the hell had just happened? What was the rest of the game like? I only had to beat this level with Mothra and then it was on to the next world. But when I moved Mothra to the red phase, the game registered it as me beating the level. I was quite relieved. I tried to prepare myself for the next world. Trance. I was still pretty shook up from the last level when I started Trance. Trance map music did nothing to ease the tension. As for how to describe it, have you ever heard of the theme from Videodrome? That's the closest thing I can think of to compare it to. I checked to see who the new monster was. It was Orga, a monster who didn't make his film debut until 2000, appearing in a game made in 1988. So much for my theories about Titansaurus and Biolante. There's no way this game was made in 1988. Those guys at Toho may be smart, but I'm sure they couldn't see that far into the future. If they could, they never would have gave Ronald Emmerich the rights to make a Godzilla movie. No, this had to be a hack of some kind, which just opened up even more questions. Who made this hack? When? How? And most importantly, why? The why question was the one that bothered me the most. My immediate assumption was to think that Billy did this to pull a joke on me, but that couldn't be right either. Billy didn't know how to make a ROM hack, and if he did, he'd probably just do something simple and stupid, like replacing all the monsters with cruelly drawn genitalia. Unless Billy had amazing game editing skills and a serious dark streak to his imagination that he never told me about, he couldn't have made this. Is it even possible to put a hacked ROM into a cartridge? Aside from that, I was drawn to a new icon on the map, a question mark. I was really curious as to what it did. I'm sure you're also curious, so I'll explain the quiz levels now. Since this was when they started appearing, there was one of these per map from here on, and they always appeared near the start of the map. When you start on a quiz level, you appear on a screen like this. As you can see, there's a question at the top, and a yes and no button, and an emoticon in the center. I refer to the questions as face, real creative I know, and for convenience I'll refer to face as the one asking the questions. The music for the quiz levels was actually a track in the game. It's one of the one that plays when you try to use Ghidorah as cheat and get sent to an unplayable level. Face asks you 12 yes or no questions, and you move your monster to the buttons for your answer. When you answer, the question disappears and Face changes expressions for about 8 seconds. Then he goes back to neutral and a new question comes up. There was no time limit or any right or wrong answers. Face has no respect for the player's personal boundaries and will sometimes ask deeply disturbing and personal questions. For example, do you like hurting people? Have you ever killed anybody? Have you been molested by a family member? Other times he would ask questions that were either mind-numbingly stupid, is the sun hot, is water wet, or just flat out ridiculous, does your dog like the president? And maybe once per quiz, Face would ask you a question about the game, with one exception. Face expansion changes seem to have no effect on the game, except for indicating what the game creator thought of your answer. His reactions rarely made any sense, and at first I thought they were randomly generated. The questions never followed a pattern. Face never stayed on the same subject for more than 2 questions. Early on, there were questions that made me think Face was building up to something, only to then ask some stupid garbage. Here are the expressions of Face that I saw while playing. I'll separate them into 2 categories: the expressions I understood and the expressions I didn't. First are the expressions I understood. Number 1, neutral, his default expression. Number 2, angry. If you try to attack Face, his expression changes to this, but nothing else happens. Number 3, sad. Number 4, happy. Number 5, sick. Number 6, maniacal. Face made this expression when he was being an asshole. You'll see what I mean later. Number 7, surprised. 8, love. 9, annoyed. 10, confused. 11, guilty/hurt. And here are the others. 2 of these only appeared once, number 1 and 2, and I suspected they might have been in-jokes from the creator. Their respective questions were, do you like ice cream and are you a tough guy? As for the questions in the first quiz, luckily I had a notepad and pen handy. I have problems remembering things, so I often carry one around to jot things down, and sometimes I doodle in it when I'm bored. So when the first quiz started, I thought I'd record what happened, and I'm glad I did. Here are the first series of questions, my answers and Face reaction. Quiz 1. Question number 1. Do you like the game? Answer, yes. Reaction, happy. 2. Are you afraid? Answer, yes. Reaction, surprised. 3. Are you over 18? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 5. 4. Do birds have teeth? Answer, no. Reaction, love. Number 5. Is peanut butter good? Answer, no. Reaction, sick. Number 6. Does the moon rotate? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 11. Number 7. Have you had a job? Answer, yes. Reaction, confused. Number 8. Do you like hurting people? Answer, no. Reaction, annoyed. Number 9. Is the sun hot? Answer, yes. Reaction, sad. Number 10. Do you like dogs? Answer, yes. Reaction, happy. 11. Is the president good? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face, the number 3. Number 12. Does your dog like the president? Answer, no. Reaction, angry. Now that I explained all that, time for gameplay. After the quiz level, I tried the new green temple icon first. Wow. Maybe this is why the game was so weird. One of the designers was clearly drugged out of his mind. Jokes aside, I was quite impressed by the graphics of this level, as disorienting as they were, but I hate those creepy blink staring statue faces. The music had a hypnotic Indian techno vibe to it. There were two new enemies in this level, a flying ghost type thing with a trunk, and a bat with a horse skull for a face. They appear at random, but I was lucky to get a screen cap of both of them. Then I proceeded to a blue mountain level, expecting another nice calm stroll. I took my time walking through and was completely taken by surprise when this happened. Mount Mogera came speeding towards me and took off quite a bit of health with his tentacle strews. It only took me 2 minutes to kill him, without having to worry about a time limit, but the boss monsters never showed up in the scrolling levels in the normal game. I was worried as to what other rules the game would break. After another Blue Mountain stage, it was time to fight Not Varen, whose replacement was one of the most bizarre things in the game. This strange creature attacks you by kicking and also opening up his chest and firing heat-seeking missiles. I still don't get it. The missiles were sometimes a pain to deal with, but I found out you could tail whip them out of the way. Not Varen was probably the easiest of the monster replacement. The same could not be said for Not Hedorah. Apparently, the source of the horse bats, Not Hedorah, was the most aggravatingly difficult monster to fight yet, mostly because of his special ability. He could shriek and summon a small swarm of those horse bat things. I know there's only 2 in the screen cap, but every time he did this, about 10 would arrive. The AI took advantage of the distraction and attacked twice as fast while the horse bats were flying around. Once that annoyance was over with, I went through a green temple level to kill some enemies to restore my health. Interestingly, none of the horse bats showed up after Not Hedorah was killed, and that was when I got an idea. If killing all the monsters makes the red face show up, what would happen if I avoided fighting Orga and go straight to the base? So I gave that a try. The game told me that there was no monster there when I tried to start the base level, and immediately afterwards, the game took control of my Godzilla piece and moved it in front of Orga. My little trick didn't work, so I tried to prepare myself for another chase. But first, I had to beat Orga. The fight with Orga confirmed another thing. Whoever created this game hack was clearly a Godzilla fan, not only because they picked a monster like Orga, but because they actually implemented something that happened in Godzilla 2000 in a really neat way. Orga's primary attacks were a punch and a heat beam from his shoulder cavity, but once you had got him down to half his health, he did something new. He would expand his jaws and try to swallow Godzilla, in the process stealing your health and energy. But in doing so, he gave himself a new weakness. Firing a heat beam into his mouth would take a devastating 4 bars off his life meter. With that weakness I revealed, I soon beat Orga, and despite how much I had hoped otherwise, the red face appeared on the map where the base was, and the music stopped. I readied myself as best as I could. I started the level, and seeing that it was basically the same as the first, I didn't waste a millisecond before I started hauling ass. I soon encountered obstacles in form of ground tiles suspended in air. Most of them you could just jump over and destroy, others you had to crouch under. About 40 seconds into it, I heard the horrible bellowing roar and saw the spider beast following closely behind me. Stacks of obstacles barely slowed it down. It would back up and then charge its way through them, smashing into the bits. And when the smaller obstacles got in his way, it would expand its jaws and swallow them whole. I was afraid, but with fast thinking and faster button pressing, I escaped him again. I felt really excited, and so I laughed and said, "Not this time, asshole." I decided to take a screen cap to celebrate. But when I said that sentence, just before the level ended, the monster did something that made my blood run cold. It looked at me. That wave of mortal terror overtook me again, and I sure as hell wasn't laughing anymore. I took another screen cap of the next level tile, but right before I rushed to the bathroom to splash some water on my face, and to take a piss that I nearly failed to contain when that fucking thing looked at me. When I got back to the game, I was getting very upset and confused. I thought about the way the monster looked at me. The game couldn't have heard what I said. That's impossible. It had to be a random occurrence. But why did it happen precisely at the moment I insulted the monster? Nothing about this game made any sense. The new Godzilla monsters, the weird replacement monsters, out-of-place imagery like the green temples, quiz levels, and the red monster chases. It didn't seem to add up in any kind of meaningful way. If it was a prank, it wasn't funny in any way I could understand, and they clearly put far too much effort into it. If they were trying to make a genuine sequel with new Godzilla monsters, then why did they add everything else? Maybe it was some kind of art experiment, some group project made by a bunch of really talented and crazy people, and they lost a cartridge somehow? Or maybe they intended for some random person to find it. It was all just fruitless guessing. As far as I could tell, there was only one way to figure out what the deal with this game was, to play it through to the end. Maybe, just maybe, there would be something in the credits, an explanation by the creators as to why they made this, or it could be something much more cryptic and strange. Maybe even something horrifying. Before I got a good look at the dementia board, I considered replaying the trance to see if the red monster would look at me again, but I decided against it. I wanted to keep moving forward. I was also somewhat worried that backtracking might cause the game to become even more strange. The dementia board music sounded a lot more like the Saturn music, except it was slowed down and played with a piano-sounding instrument. Like most of these new map themes, they had a dangerous, suspenseful feel. While listening to the music, I looked at the dementia board. There were 4 boss monsters this time: Space Godzilla, Manda, Gigon, and Baragon. I was surprised that there were 2 new Toho monsters this time, but the best surprise was still to come. I started the quiz level. Here's another list of quiz results in the same format as the last one. Quiz 2. Number 1. Can you swim? Answer, yes, reaction, happy. 2. Do you like fish? Answer, yes, reaction, sick. 3. Can penguins fly? Answer, no, reaction, sad. 4. Can it spin in all directions? There was no clarification of what the face meant by it, so I just guessed. Answer, no, reaction, surprised. Do you breathe oxygen? Answer, yes, reaction, weird face number 8. 6. Does it taste good when you bite a woman? I don't know who came up with this question, but I really hope they're getting mental help. Answer, no, reaction, annoyed. 7. Is it night where you are? Answer, yes, reaction, weird face number 6. 8. Do you like cats? Answer, yes, reaction, confused. 9. Is water wet? Answer, yes, reaction, angry. 10. Have you ever broken a bone? Answer, no, reaction, happy. 11. Do you like your job? Answer, yes, reaction, hurt. 12. Would you like a new monster? Answer, yes, reaction, weird face number 11. I wasn't entirely sure at the time what face meant by a new monster, but I couldn't resist answering yes just to see what would happen. The result was mind-blowing. The game took me back to the board and I had a new playable monster in the form of Anguirus. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to play as Anguirus, since he was my second favorite Godzilla monster, and plus I never liked Mothra all that much. I moved my new Anguirus piece over to the level right next to it, eager to test out my new monster. Before I get into the level description, I'll talk about Anguirus a bit. Using the up and down buttons, you could choose whether Anguirus stood in a bipedal stance or crawled on all fours. It wasn't a huge difference, but being able to stand was helpful in boss fights, and crawling sometimes helped dodge obstacles and attacks. He could punch and kick like Godzilla, but no tail whip. Instead, he had something far more interesting: the ability to curl into a spike ball of death and roll around. You could still take damage, but it was lessened. It was a good way of clearing out stage enemies, but unfortunately doing this also drained the power bar. But the spike ball wasn't his only special ability. When you press start, he would fire a beam of energy from his mouth. It resembled Titansaurus' sonar attack, and if there was a hack, it may have been inspired by the roar attack from Atari's Godzilla fighting games. Also of note is that when playing as Anguirus, the level meter gets glitched up. Judging by the life and power bar, I'd say he's on level 10. Now onto the level. As you might have guessed from the level icon, these levels are a green palette swap of the ground and background tiles from the blue mountains. But what immediately caught my attention was the water, which had a transparency effect. Was that even possible for an NES game? I know the Super Nintendo could do it, but I had never seen a transparency effect in a game on an NES. The Green Mountain music was played with the same instruments as the Blue Mountains, but the melody was totally different. It was a simple song with a lot of abrupt pauses, followed by a loud note every few seconds. Anyway, I went through the usual strolling through the level, and again there were no monsters or anything. But pretty soon I had reached a cliff above the water. There was nowhere to go but into the water, so down I went. The water transparency made the things a little bit harder to see, but it's tolerable. After going underwater, I encountered two new enemies, a giant piranha and some kind of spiky bottom feeder thing. I liked the piranha because I could easily tell what it was. It was the same enemy design that would appear in the real game, and there were very few enemies like this. They didn't take much hits to kill, but they were quite annoying, and could considerably trim down your life if they got close enough. They also tend to travel in packs. As for the bottom feeders, they're easy to deal with. They swim along the bottom of the screen towards you and are easily crushed with a roll attack or jumped over. In this screen cap, you can see me about to run over one of them, and there's a pack of piranhas behind it. After I beat that level, I moved Godzilla onto the blue castle icon. I started the level and got a title screen with the text Unforgiving Cold. The level itself looked like a castle dungeon made of blue bricks, with rows of identical white statue faces on the walls. These statue faces had a permanent look of horror on their faces. There was also some flickering gray static, which didn't really obscure my vision, but it adds to the very unsettling mood of these levels. The music was a 12-second loop of a low-pitched choir vocalization that sounded very familiar to me. Whenever I played through one of these levels, I got this sudden horrible feeling of anxiety. I had the feeling that the farther I progressed through the level, the closer I was getting to something unspeakably evil. There wasn't any enemies, but these were some of the longest levels in the game. I only played one level, but it took 7 minutes to complete. I didn't want to admit it to myself at the time, but I realized something playing the Blue Castle level. This game has the power to make the player feel certain things. I don't mean it in the sense that you get irritated playing a crappy game or get unnerved by something scary in a game. What I mean is that certain events in the game could instantly make you start feeling something. I know that sounds completely insane, and I don't blame you for not believing me. I wouldn't believe any of this either if I didn't play the game myself. But there's something very, very wrong with this game, and I still don't know how to explain it. So then it was time to fight Baragon's replacement. Although Baragon was originally the smallest monster in the game, his replacement was the largest. It was so tall in fact that the ground was noticeably lowered, and not Baragon's head still barely avoided collision with the bar at the top of the screen. And he was just as frighteningly bizarre as he was huge. You may be wondering how he attacks without arms. Well, he has the most powerful kick in the game, but his other fighting technique is much stranger. First, he blasts a cloudy breath of pixel down at you, which causes you to freeze. Then he walks back right to the corner of the screen and extends a huge Gatling gun from his abdomen. That might seem amusing to you, but it certainly wasn't to me when I was playing the game. The attack is almost as annoying as a kick on Saw, and not Baragon could have been unbeatable if he consistently used it. Thankfully, he only did it twice while fighting him. Once you unfreeze, you can run up and start damaging the gun, which does extra damage to him. This helped me destroy him, and then it was time to play the third level type. I decided that I was going to use Nigiri's to fight Manda and Gigan, and then fight Space Godzilla as Godzilla. It was only fitting. Before getting into the battles, I'll describe the third level type, the Arctic. The Arctic is exactly what you guessed from the name, an icy tundra with a few watery segments. The music reminded me a bit of Northern Hemisphere from Donkey Kong Country in a 8-bit form. A very dangerous sounding song. It made me think about being trapped in the tundra and freezing to death. There were two new enemies in this stage. The first was a creature frozen in a block of ice. They block your way and you have to use the heat beam to thaw them out of ice. They look a little bit like smaller versions of Not Jazora, only without the eye. When freed, they do a strange calling movement and push you backwards. It doesn't cause any damage, but it's a bit annoying. After dealing with the Iceman, I kept walking for a minute or two and came upon a water segment. I jumped in, and this time I managed to get a screen cap showing how the water splashes when you jump in. Don't know how they programmed that, but it was pretty impressive. Another interesting thing is how the screen changes focus when you go underwater. Here you can see the other new enemy, a little thing I call a spike walker. They walk towards you and explode randomly or instantly if you attack them, sending spikes in every direction. The spikes don't do much damage, but they did get me dangerously close to falling into a pit a few times. Oh, and speaking of the pits, down into the water, the game has a platformer element, bottomless pits. There weren't any of this in the original game since it was a strictly action game, but the pits were a neat addition. After getting back on land, I encountered a very unexpected mini-boss, Maguma, the walrus kaiju. I know this game had some obscure monsters to begin with, but wow. Not that I'm complaining, it's just a pretty cool cameo for an unappreciated kaiju. Maguma's fighting tactics were very simple. He had a freeze beam and he could charge into you. Not very challenging, but certainly more entertaining than the Mantango mini-boss in the original game. One really interesting thing about Maguma is that he doesn't die when you defeat him. He turns tail and retreats. This was the first time I had ever seen an enemy monster change direction, let alone retreat. I tried to chase after him, but he disappeared after I got into the water. Poor bastard. And that does it for the Arctic. I'll talk about the Manda fight next. I forgot to mention before, but the music that played during the new monster fights is reused from the themes actually in the game. So far the themes have been Titanosaurus, which is Sora's music, Violante, Hidora's music, Orga, Baragon/Mogera's music, Manda, Varan's music, Space Godzilla, MacLeod's music. As for the fight, Manda was fairly a crafty opponent. When it realized one tactic wasn't effective, it would immediately change to a different one. Manda used quite a few tricks like spitting fire, biting, and the most irritating of all, constricting. It doesn't mercilessly drain your life down like Gigan's Cutter, but it was by far Manda's strongest attack. One last thing to note that I found pretty cool was that the Atragon showed up during the fight to help me out. Manda crushed it with ease, but it was still cool. After I slayed Manda, I played through an Arctic level for health power-ups and then it was on to Gigan's replacement. When the fight started, I was very confused because there was nothing there. I thought this was going to be like the Titanosaurus fight in Pathos, but just about the time it would have been going back to the map, a piranha appeared on screen. But it wasn't there for long. As soon as it appeared, the speakers emitted an ear-splitting screech and not Gigan flew in and ripped the poor fish into pieces. Well, that's one way to get the player on their toes. The abrupt entrance scared the hell out of me and got my adrenaline rushing, which in retrospect was a good thing because Not Gigan was one of the fastest, most unrelenting opponents in the game. Not Gigan was tough, but my new skills when Agiris will help to even the score. This was still an incredibly intense fight. Not Gigan's attack consisted of some kind of blood laser he spews from his mouth, and a downward slash. I was expecting some hellish variant of the buzzsaw attack, but thankfully there didn't seem to be one. The howl attack was invaluable in defeating him. I would have taken more screen caps of the fight, but I really had to concentrate. After that, there was just one monster left to take down, Space Godzilla. As mentioned earlier, I used Godzilla for this fight. Space Godzilla's fighting technique was rather frustrating, but admittedly a very clever idea. Space Godzilla would use his energy to create two flying crystals, which would reach the ground and become crystal spires. These spires not only block you from reaching Space Godzilla, but also allowed him to constantly recharge to full energy, and blast you with a deadly fully charged Corona Beam until you broke the spires. Space Godzilla would eventually drain his own spires of energy until they shattered, but if you waited for that to happen, you'd probably lose a lot of life. Heat beams actually seemed to re-energize the spires, so you had to use physical attacks. When you finally got close enough to hit Space Godzilla, he was no pushover. When I punched him, he hit me back just as hard. Space Godzilla does everything in his power to knock you back to the left corner of the screen so he could create more spires. By the time this was over, I only had like 5 life bars left, but it didn't matter because I didn't need to fight anymore, I needed to run. Here we go again. I decided right then that I really wanted to see the end of this game. As terrifying as these levels could sometimes be, I had to beat them to get through. I decided that no matter what happened, no matter what the game showed me, I was going to get to the end. And I also made sure not to say a damn word while playing chase level from here on. For this chase, I tried out Anguirus since his roll attack allowed me to move faster than Godzilla or Mothra. The chase started off like the first two, except there was a river of blood below the ground. I was beginning to get the hang of it, and the extra speed from the roll helped me get an edge on the red monster, especially since I didn't have to worry about a power limit and could keep rolling endlessly. Like the previous levels with water, the ground inevitably reached its stop, so I rolled off into the blood, and to my surprise, the Hell Beast didn't follow after me. It just stopped at the edge of the ground and grimaced. I guess it can't swim, I thought to myself. So I went under blood and continued moving. There wasn't anything around, but I knew something was up. The chase wasn't going to end that easily, could it? Surely something else had to show up, and sure enough, I heard the bellowing roar sounding slightly different. And the monster was following me after, in a new aquatic body. I had no idea it was a shapeshifter. After it reappeared, the chase started getting into the difficulty I expected. Being submerged slowed me down and putting me in the beast about the same speed. The only thing that would keep me alive was fast thinking and reflexes. I encountered some bottomless pits in which mines floated up from. I assumed that if you hit one, it would damage you and knock you back. Considering how the fast red monster swims, hitting the mines would be instant death, so I went through great effort to avoid them. But that wasn't all I had to be wary of. Halfway through the chase, the Hell Beast revealed yet another surprise. A tentacle formed of intestine and tipped with a claw set of jaws burst from its mouth, trying to pull me in and devour me. I only barely avoided both the tentacle and the mines, but I could tell the beast was getting desperate because the chase was nearly over. And about a minute later, I had spotted a bit of ground that served as the exit. I leaped with all the might I could muster without breaking my controller, and the beast screamed with rage and jumped out of the blood river in one last attempt to drag me down, but I escaped its grasp. This time. I fell back on my bed and took a deep breath, satisfied with yet another successful escape. Now I was headed to the fifth world, Entropy. In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto. Ironically, despite being the smallest planet, Pluto was the largest and most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but was similarly huge and diverse. Board music was played by a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful and then it gets rather, I would call it distorted. It made me feel depressed and unnerved, not something I would want to hear while trying to sleep. Strangely, none of these levels from the previous worlds were present here. Instead, there were 8 brand new icons. The bosses this time were Megalon, Batra, and Mega Godzilla. As usual, the first thing I did was go to the quiz level for another interrogation from Faith. But when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the goofy Ghidorah music, it was the password theme. The music change seemed to be intentional because after the first 2 questions at the start, the quiz started to take on a darker tone. Quiz 3. Number 1. Do you like ice cream? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 1. 2. Do you like clowns? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 10. 3. Is time slipping through your fingers? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 2. 4. Do you have any regrets? Answer, yes. Reaction, hurt. 5. Do some people deserve to die? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 3. 6. Is it safe to go out at night? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 5. 7. Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 9. 8. Have you ever killed anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 7. 9. Do you want to kill anyone? Answer, no. Reaction, angry. 10. Are you actually accomplishing anything? Answer, no. Reaction, weird face number 4. 11. Does life have any real meaning? Answer, no. Reaction, love. 12. Do you like Mothra? Answer, no. Reaction, maniacal. I knew that last one was going to be a gameplay related question, but I had no idea what the result would be. I answered honestly because, as I said before, I never liked Mothra. Nobody liked playing as Mothra in this game, and there was a good reason for that. Every other time Mothra gets hit, she gets slammed back to the left corner of the screen, and she sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit Mothra had was being able to fly over obstacles in some levels, so I answered no, and Face actually replied back to me, not only with a maniacal expression, but with text. Too bad. I was taken back to the map screen, and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and Garrus had disappeared from the board, leaving only Mothra. Face had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed, but there wasn't anything I could do, and I'm willing to bet even if I said yes, I would have been stuck with Mothra anyways. Face giveth, Face taketh away. I took a deep breath and got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take through the board. I decided to take the lower one. This turned out to be a good choice for reasons I'll get to momentarily. The first world ahead of me was a forest, so I started there. Almost immediately, I got an eerie feeling. There was something about the level that just seemed off to me, even more so than the previous ones. Perhaps it was the pitch black background. I've always been afraid of being in a forest at night. Something about all the trees makes me feel surrounded and vulnerable. And the fact that I was stuck as Mothra didn't help. Playing the game's previous worlds as Godzilla gave me a feeling of bravery, being in control of the king of the monsters. I'd be able to handle just anything in my way. But it's not like that with Mothra. No feeling of strength or security. Now I'm just a weak, easily overwhelmed bug traversing into the unknown. Back to the level. The music had new instruments, sounding like woodwinds, followed by slow rhythmic drums and chiming bells. Gave me this feeling that I was intruding into some dangerous place I really shouldn't be. After a while, I encountered the first enemies of the stage, or at least I assumed they were enemies. They were strange, long-legged, deer-like creatures. Instead of attacking, they were just idly walking by. I went to approach them and they ran away. I thought about shooting one with an eye beam to see what would happen, but it seemed wrong. These creatures were harmless, so I passed over them and continued through the level. About halfway through, I encountered groups of deer-like animals and also 2 new creatures. A sloth-like creature with a beak climbing on a tree, and a hairy raptor-esque beast that were preying on the deer. It was very surreal watching these creatures interact. I didn't feel like I was playing a video game, but rather that I was traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptors did attack me when I got too close, or if I attacked them first. I know I shot one of them to help one of the deer creatures escape. I got clawed at, but confrontation was easily avoided by flying up to the top of the screen. After that, I had to choose whether I wanted to play the levels with the hourglass or the TV screen. I picked the latter, and what I got was not at all expected. When I pressed the button to start a level on the TV screen like I normally would, the screen with an animation popped up. There was also music in the background, which was the goofy Ghidorah music that used to be playing when the quiz levels. I was somewhat unsettled by this because it was just so strange. I also found it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that looked just like that when I was a kid. After starting the animation, you could go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had no idea what to expect of the rest of the icons. I went to try an hourglass next. I was somewhat relieved when the actual level came up. It was certainly an unorthodox looking level, all brown with time measuring instruments floating in the air and a gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen. And very early in the level I encountered something else I didn't expect to see. Original enemies from the game. And not just that, it seemed to be a whole fleet of them, and the yellow tanks, which were normally immobile, could now move. I took some damage, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. But the most interesting thing about this level was the colored hourglass items. There were 3 of these. 1, a blue hourglass that made time slow down and filled the level with enemies from the past. Number 2, a red hourglass that made time speed up and filled the level with enemies from the future. 3, a green hourglass that set time to the normal speed and filled the level with original game enemies. I encountered the blue hourglass first. As stated, the game started to slow down. I saw the enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. I don't know much about prehistory, but I believe all of these enemies represent real animals. The level went into another segment and I encountered the green hourglass. And then I fought the original enemies again. It was the same 5 types, so I didn't take any screenshots, but in the last segment I encountered the red hourglass and the enemies that must have been from the future. Now, whether or not the game was showing me 8-bit renditions of creatures that will actually exist thousands of years into the Earth's future, I have no idea. But with that thought in mind, I found this particular segment to be very eerie, and it was more tense because everything moved faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I saw in a book once called Trodon Man. Another looked like some kind of organic spaceship. There was only one of the 5th type of future creation, and when it appeared, all the others ran for their lives, leaving me alone to battle it. It could fly, but its sprite didn't actually move, and its single attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. And even so, it was surprisingly powerful, and I suppose it could be considered a mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored the health and energy I had lost fighting it, which was convenient. It seemed I would need all the help I could get to beat this world with Mothra alone. After that previous stage I called Time Warp, the next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looked grungy and inhospitable. The music was a short looping of ambient synthesizer song. Listening to it made me feel like I had sniffed some toxic fumes myself and it was messing with my head the whole time. I even felt like I was choking while playing the level. The enemies all seem to be mutated to some degree. In the above screenshot, you can see green mummies with bird skulls that jump out of the waste to spit projectiles. There's also a brownish cow skeleton monster with spider legs. Halfway through the level, I even saw one of the deer from the forest. It was alone, and when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of a barrel with an anteater-like tongue. I was moving over to try to make it stop, but then this flock of skull birds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ended up running off the ground into the toxic waste. I feel bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but I regained health quick from killing all of them. They were rather weak. I pressed onward, and of all the levels in Entropy, this was probably the most normal in there that was little deviance from the move forward, smash things formula in the original game. I encountered more creatures through the level like tentacled blobs, and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so I kept on flying near the top of the screen. I still had to deal with the occasional flock of birds now and then. At the end of the level was a large bluish green lake, and there I encountered another mini-boss. Some kind of monster with a long neck and a whale skull. It attacks with a mouth projectile, and by charging into you, it could also go underneath the water, and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss from the Time Warp, and it had a lot of health because it must have taken me 3 minutes to defeat it. It let out a really loud noise when it died, and then sank back into the water as I left the screen. Back on the board, I went to the nearest level icon I hadn't seen yet, which was a white tree. As I guessed, the level was a winter-themed recolor of the forest stage. But unlike the regular forest, I didn't feel unnerved starting this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it. It was a gentle, calm song. It almost sounded romantic. It was quite stress-relieving, and the forest itself looked much less ominous covered in snow. I traveled through the first segment enjoying the atmosphere for 4 minutes, when suddenly I realized something. I haven't seen a single creature since I started the level. Where are all the animals? Soon after, I left the screen and the next segment started. In the second segment, I was still in the winter forest, but now the music was gone. I was starting to feel suspicious, but then I reminded myself that there were other empty levels in the game, and this was likely another one of those. But then, I heard something familiar. It was a 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Cold starting up. I could feel my heart start to sink as I came across this horrible sight. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they must have all frozen to death. On closer inspection, some were missing body parts. Now I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in a living state, and sure enough I did. It was a creature much like the beaked sloth, except this thing had white fur and was more of a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was happy to at least see something alive. However, it didn't stay that way for long. A pack of raptors who must have sensed something else was still alive came rushing in from the right side of the screen. The big gorilla didn't stand a chance, as one of the raptors immediately lunged at it and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors acted far different from their temperative relatives. While the other raptors only attacked while hunting prey or when provoked, the winter raptors seemed to have all gone insane. They attacked everything in sight, and one was running back and forth clawing at nothing. Even the noises they made sounded different, more high-pitched and enraged. As I left the second segment, I even saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one of the raptors had been blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't stay to see who won the fight. I only had to get through one more segment before I could go back to the board screen, but in this segment I was no longer in the winter forest, but instead a very empty grassy plain with a bright gray moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 had returned. And immediately I started to feel dread. This is going to sound crazy, but it's the absolute truth. The game made this level from one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached a lake, and then the moon moved down from the sky and began to hatch like an egg. When it did, a curled up humanoid figure fell into the lake as the moon halves quickly disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water, and then a moment of silence. Then the screen began to shake and a new creature emerged from the water. And thus, I was introduced to a monster I called the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took, as I was focusing all my concentration on winning the fight. It was the most difficult fight yet, stronger than any of the previous bosses. This creature would have been hard to take down with Godzilla, and with Mothra it seemed nearly impossible. I suppose I would consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attack like Gigansol, because if it had, I would never have won this. I barely had 3 bars of health when I finally killed this abomination. But what happened afterwards is hardly what I would call a reward. I've been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I have to get it off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me, but the game already knows about it, and I think you should too. I'll just tell you the important points because I don't like bringing this experience back into my head unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would instantly lose any expression she had before. She would speak very clearly without any hints of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands, and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me in words, and I won't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in a field at night and look at the stars. But one night she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly sprung up and ran right into traffic. I tried to stop her, but I was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked her right in the eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight has always haunted me. I know that game knows about this because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened. Melissa, kill yourself. Kill, 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 kill. After that, the game went back to the board screen. It was all I could do to not burst out screaming, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the controller. I knew the game was going to test me if I kept playing, but I had no idea I would go so far, or that it was even capable of doing what it just did. I could feel my brain going haywire as I asked myself, did the game just read my mind? That didn't seem possible, but what other explanation was there? It was then that I could no longer deny what now seemed obvious. The game is alive, and not only that, it can also establish some kind of mental connection with the player. And yet, I couldn't convince myself to stop playing. I don't know if it was a game messing with my mind or just my stubborn curiosity, but even with the previous revelation, I really wanted to see this through the end, even more than I did before I beat Dementia. Terrifying as it might be, even dangerous, I knew that if I quit playing, I would never be able to stop thinking about it. if I try to restart the game, it might go back to being normal again. How many people ever get to witness something like this firsthand, let alone be able to take screenshots of the whole thing? Fucked up as it was, this was the experience of a lifetime. But even so, I couldn't take any chances with my health. I had the TV remote right next to me, ready to turn off the TV in case I felt like I was in actual danger. And if that didn't work, I would pull the plug out of the wall or just run out of the room. Surely that would be enough. Whatever powers the game has, it seemed to be confined to what it can show on the TV and whatever its mental connection could do. The latter was what worried me. I still didn't know what I was dealing with, so I wasn't about to underestimate it. I took a break for a few minutes to calm my nerves, and then it was back to the game. And speaking of TVs, there was a TV screen icon right below the white forest I had just left. And because the first animation was so bizarre, I figured I'd try another to see what happened. Although I expected the same animation, I actually got a totally different one. Weird. Music for this one was the Neptune board music. Fitting, I suppose, since it's a fishman and all. I can't help but wonder what the point of these things were. There was one more TV screen icon, so I figured it must have a unique animation of its own. I was going to make sure to see what it was before I left Entropy. But then it was time for another level. The gold brick icon was the closest thing, so I went to that. I started up in a gold labyrinth level. My health and power were refilled, not sure how or why, but I was glad not to be heading in the unknown nearly dead. I also noticed that my Mothra sprite had shrunk to half its original size. The music was slow, ominous, drumbeat, with the female vocals kicking in about a minute into it. Quite haunting. The gold labyrinth itself was an anomaly. I'm not sure how this level would have played out if I was using Godzilla and Gears, because flying seemed necessary to just get around to this place. Another thing that caught my attention was that when you go left, your monster actually turns and faces the left. That sounds stupidly obvious, but in the original game you were only supposed to move to the right, so when you tried to move left, your monster ended up walking/flying backwards. This level was apparently gigantic in size because every time I thought I had reached an end to it, or thought I was going to end up back where I started, I encountered something totally new. Things like lava blockades, new enemies, and statue faces. And I found one statue face at a dead end with a wide open-eyed stare. The night Melissa died, she had an expression on her face that looked exactly like this the whole time. Even when she got hit by the truck, she still had that same expression. I can't help but feel like something really is staring at me from behind the screen when I look at this. I really didn't want to be reminded of that night anymore, so I left the statue almost as soon as I found it. I needed to find the exit anyway, which proved to be no simple task. It felt like this level stretched on it forever in all directions. I must have wandered around the level for at least 15 minutes before I finally saw something. It was a creature that wasn't gold, seemingly the only one of its kind in the level. Lacking any kind of hover ability like the other creatures, it just walked back and forth on the platform. But it wasn't long after that I found it that a flying machine swooped down and grabbed it, then flew off with it. The machine apparently had not seen it, so I decided to follow it to see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a room with a large cauldron-like object in the center. The machine hovered over the cauldron and dropped the creature in it. The creature emerged from a hole in the cauldron's side, now adorned in the same gold color as everything else. The machine flew off. I'm not really sure what to make of this, but I'm glad I came upon it because I found the exit soon after. When I got back to the board, I realized that the bosses hadn't moved at all. A bit odd, but it didn't bother me. It made planning my route through Entropy easier. There were still two new icons to explore, the Indigo Cliffs and a black version of the Labyrinth. Since there were only 3 black Labyrinth icons which were surrounded by bosses, I played the Indigo Cliffs first. It was a lot like the Blue-Green Mountains. The level graphics had the same shredded look to it. There was also a recolor of the clouds and moon from the Toxic Waste Dump. The music, if you can call it that, was merely a deep rumbling noise. One of the first things I encountered were these multicolored creatures with big heads emerging from a small cave in the ground. They all made synchronized shaking sound, and they walked to the right in a group after emerging from the cave, ignoring me. Having no other way to go, I followed them on their route. More and more emerged from the cave until the group had about 100 creatures. Eventually, the pathway ended in a cliff. I was shocked to see that, upon reaching the cliff, all these creatures began jumping off into an abyss. I've seen enemies walk off cliffs before, but I've never seen NPCs commit mass suicide like this. Very unsettling way to start off a level. I continued on, flying over some various strange animals like the ones shown here. Another group of multicolored bobbleheads was jumping up and down, only to be snatched up by the large birds, which I'm fairly certain are sprite versions of the giant condor from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I defeated some of the condors in battle, but it bothered me that these bobbleheads seem to be so eager to die. If the game itself is alive, perhaps the creatures in these levels are also alive? And some have very unhappy lives if this behavior is any indication. But what provokes them to do this? In the back of my mind, I almost suspect that the glowing moon in the sky is the reason. At the end of the level, I saw yet another group of the bobbleheads marching up to the large monster and being devoured. This was starting to disgust me, so acting on impulse, I fired off eye beams at both the monster and the bobblehead. I destroyed the cave. The monster became angry, and ran through the remaining bobbleheads to fight me. Although it lacked any ranged attack, it was relentless, but it was no match for me. I was almost in the home stretch now, up to the bosses. My plan was to go through Batra first, then Megalon. After that, I would watch the last TV screen, play the Black Labyrinth before fighting Mecha Godzilla. And lastly, going through the chase with the Hell Beast, I was curious to see if it would be in a new form again. But first things first, time to beat up Batra. As I expected, he started off in his larva form. The music was Varan's battle theme. Whenever the game puts in a new Godzilla kaiju with more than one form, the other form always shows up. For a game that's otherwise inexplicable, it's rather startling in its consistency and accuracy with the new kaiju bosses. The fight started off simple. Larva Batra fought in a similar fashion as Maguma did, charging back and forth and occasionally firing off lightning from its horn. During the fight, I noticed that Mothra's combat capabilities have been altered in my favor. The I-beams did twice as much damage as it did originally, and now they were as strong as Godzilla's punches. The poison powder was similarly improved. It also did this nice thing where it would actually hit an enemy when you use it. 2. In the original game, even though Mothra could fly, she was unable to fly over an opponent. You would get knocked back the same way as if you just ran straight into them, which was extremely annoying, but not anymore. I could change directions and fly around, which was a big help because fighting Imago Batra is much like fighting a clone Mothra, although Batra was distinctly faster and stronger. No longer impeded by its own slow-moving larva form, Imago Batra was a fearsome opponent. Although it lacked the Horn Lightning, it now had a new, more powerful I-beam. Batra could change direction just like I could, so this battle involved a lot of flipping and flying around. It was pretty damn fun, to be honest. So after defeating Batra, I was excited to see what Megalon would be like. But first I went through an Indigo Cliffs level and shot through a lot of the creatures for the health power-ups. So about Megalon, his music was Gigan's theme. Makes sense since Gigan was his battle partner in Megalon's one, and so far only, film appearance. He was a lot like Moguera, but faster with more weapons. He'd start out charging with his drills. I liked to fly back and forth around him, which seemed to really annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd step back, turn around, and start spitting out grenades. Those were a pain because they bounce when they hit the ground. Lastly, he started spamming his lightning beam. It only went straight forward, so it was easy to duck under it and then shoot him with I-beams. Overall, I'd describe him as strong, persistent, but dumb. I was not nearing the end of Entropy, and I had just taken down Megalon, and I started up the last TV screen to see what I'd get this time. The result was unpleasant. The music for this gruesome scene was the password theme. I couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent in comparison to the other two. The whole game seemed to be growing more malevolent. As I went on to finish Entropy, I began to feel drained. It's hard to describe, like I had suddenly became tired when I wasn't before. Most likely it was just the tension from all that had happened in this game getting to me, but who knows. The last level type on entropy was what I call the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black, the music was an evil ambience, similar to the unforgiving Cold Loop but distinctly different. The music was my first sign that this level was going to be distressing. I traveled through the maze for about a minute and I noticed that there wasn't any creatures hovering around. It was an odd transition from the Gold Labyrinth, which was overrun with creatures, to this level that had nothing at all. But then this might be a good thing, maybe there wasn't any obstacles and I could get through the level with ease. Then the screen went dark. And immediately I snapped out of my daze for a few seconds earlier. Everything had been darkened so that the only thing I could see was the monster sprite. I couldn't tell where I was going and I ended up frantically running into walls. I heard a noise, the sound of a crowd running through a hallway. And along with the running came the roars. Loud roaring sounds, which I would describe as something like rabid dogs the size of an elephant, screaming with fury. And I could tell that whatever was making this noise, there was lots of them. I knew there was something there, but it wasn't until I did some screen cap editing that I got to see what my pursuers looked like. But at the time, I couldn't see where they were or where I was going. I was literally running blind, and this mob of beasts eventually caught up with me. All I could think was no, as I saw my life bar rapidly declining. The monsters had taken me down to half my total health when I was saved. The light came back on, and the attackers had disappeared. And so the challenge of this level was revealed. Find the exit before the lights go out and a pack of monsters maul you to death. I was in a panic mode now, moving as fast as I could while trying every path I could find for a way out. As I played through the level, the lights went out a total of 3 times. The second time I would have been dead meat if it had not been for one wide-eyed statue. As I stayed close to it, the monsters seemed to all avoid me until the light came back. The statue warded them away somehow. I was safe as long as I stayed near the statue, but at the same time I had to leave to find the exit. The Shadow Labyrinth turned out to be much smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, as it only took about 6 minutes to navigate to the end. But before the exit, there was a row of halls leading straight down. With no way out once entered, you either got to exit before the monsters reached you, or you died. Thankfully, I made it out. Only one more boss, Godzilla. I started the battle and got something unexpected. Not only did my life shoot back up to 100% again, it seems to do that randomly, but instead of a replacement boss, I was fighting Godzilla. But any Godzilla fan worth their salt can figure this out. Godzilla started off like fighting like a clone of Godzilla, but his disguise burned away after only 3 life bars. Usually a transformation only occurred at the halfway point. At this point, it was like fighting Godzilla in the normal game. It felt kinda nice to fight one of the original game enemies for a change. Although he wasn't exactly normal, he also had a rainbow beam and finger missiles. This prevented me from doing the old trick of backing him into the corner and hitting him with I-beams within a spot where he can't hit me. But that was always a cheap trick anyways. But after getting him down to half his health, something weird started to happen again. His sprite started to glitch in much the same way as Jizora had way back in the first world. After a few seconds, the glitches began to form a new shape. And thus the game had created not Godzilla, and I discovered that this visual glitch was somehow related to the game recreating things. The human on face on this one gives it a very uncanny look. It was one of the stronger replacement monsters and had the most firepower. Pictured here is its mouth beam, which I got caught in the middle of. Even though it was a bit stronger, it was also slower than its original counterpart and couldn't jump around as much. I won the fight by consistently staying out of its line of fire, bombarding the machine with poison power as I flew over it. One last thing to do, the Hellbeast chase. Oh boy. Might as well just get this over with, I thought. The entropy end chase ended up being exactly what I was afraid it would be, a labyrinth level. All the other chases, although difficult, were extremely straightforward. You just had to run to the right and not get touched. But this took all the simplicity out of it. There's no telling how big this labyrinth would be or where the exit was. And now not only did I have to constantly backtrack to find my way out, I also had to avoid getting one hit killed by the red monster. And for those first 30 seconds, it didn't show up, but I knew it would. As I started picking up the pace, I heard a loud flapping noise. And there it was, in a flying form, It flew with bat-like wings, and was as fast and relentless as ever. For reasons already stated, this was probably the most nerve-wracking of all the end chases. As such, I had to keep my focus on the game and not taking screen caps. However, I did take one of the red monster doing something I found very interesting. I had managed to lose it by going through a different path than it apparently expected, and it was blocked for attacking me by one of the organic walls of the red labyrinth, or so I thought. It tried clawing through the wall for a second before opening its mouth and tearing the wall apart with its intestine jaws. But those brief milliseconds that the monster was held back might have been the key for me finding the exit. The path to exit was long and complex, but from what I remember, I went up and then back towards the left. I'm still not sure why I chose that particular way, just a lucky hunch I suppose. I was sweating profusely, but my luck had saved me again. I hoped that it wouldn't run out before I finished the game. There were only 2 more worlds to go. Next was the penultimate world, called Exodus.
In this little shop of horrors, that's how we get down. Yeah, enter, the project's on the prairie, scary. We two at the gate with Bloody Marys. Blood, a rail full of blood. Back to the cemetery, get more blood. Standing on the grave, drinking blood, smoking bones. We seen a crew of ghouls running by with stolen tombstones. With Hell's Angels on the chase, they lust to bust a black skull. Want you embrace, they tie you up in chains and they stomp on your face. They go to purgatory and they beat the fucking case. I look around, mad bodies being buried in